Did you know that hyperinflation in Zimbabwe once reached 79.6 billion% per month? Today, we're diving deep into the often misunderstood world of African economies, visualizing the highs, the lows, and the surprising resilience of a continent on the rise. Forget generic stereotypes, we're unpacking real data, exploring historical trends, and revealing the hidden truths behind Africa's economic story. Our journey begins with a look back, examining the long shadow of colonialism. Before the wave of independence movements in the 1960s, European powers ruthlessly extracted resources, leaving a lasting impact on African economies. Consider Belgium's Congo Free State, where the rubber and ivory trade generated profits equivalent to 30 billion today. This single venture funded half of Belgium's public works. Even after independence, many African nations remained heavily reliant on exporting raw materials, a dependence that shaped their economic trajectories. We'll see this dependence visualized in GDP charts, illustrating Nigeria's oil boom in the 1970s, when GDP tripled, followed by a dramatic crash in the 1980s, with a GDP drop of 13% in 1986. The 1980s were a particularly challenging period, often referred to as the lost decade. External debt soared from 60 billion in 1980 to 200 billion in 1990. Many African countries were forced to implement structural adjustment programs under the guidance of the IMF and World Bank. These programs often involved cutting subsidies and privatizing state-owned enterprises, leading to social unrest and riots. For example, in Sudan in 1985, protests against austerity measures resulted in several deaths. The impact was stark. GDP per capita fell by an average of 0.7% annually between 1980 and 2000. But it's not just about historical debts and colonial legacies. Africa has also faced numerous economic crises, from banking collapses to hyperinflation. A comprehensive dataset spanning from 1860 to 2014 reveals the frequency and severity of these crises across 13 countries. The Central African Republic, for instance, experienced 14 systemic crises during this period. Angola saw 9 banking crises after gaining independence in 1975. The 1980s and 1990s were particularly turbulent, with many countries grappling with soaring inflation rates. Zambia's inflation rate peaked at a staggering 183% in 1993. And let's not forget Zimbabwe's hyperinflation in 2008, a period of such economic instability that the country issued a Z100 trillion note. But what about the modern challenges facing African economies? The UNCTAD Economic Development in Africa Report 2024 highlights vulnerabilities in several key areas: economic, governance, connectivity, social, energy, and climate. The COVID-19 pandemic and the Russia-Ukraine war have further exacerbated these vulnerabilities, causing GDP contraction in 27 African countries between 2020 and 2022. Commodity export volatility has hit countries like Nigeria, which are heavily dependent on oil revenues. Despite these challenges, there are also signs of progress and resilience. The African Continental Free Trade Area, or AfCFTA, launched on January 1, 2021, represents a significant step towards greater economic integration. With the potential to create a 3.4 trillion market and integrate 1.3 billion people across 54 countries, AfCFTA aims to boost intra-African trade and foster economic growth. Currently, only 18% of Africa's 1 trillion annual trade is within the continent, compared to 60% in Asia. AfCFTA aims to increase this to 50% by 2035 through tariff reductions and the removal of trade barriers. Small and medium-sized enterprises, or SMEs, play a crucial role in African economies, providing 80% of jobs. However, these businesses often face significant challenges, including limited access to finance and currency volatility. In 2023, 32% of firms reported limited finance access as their top barrier. The South African rand, for example, fell by 12% against the US dollar in 2023. Now, let's address some of the controversies and suppressed histories that often get overlooked in discussions about African economics. The resource curse narrative, which suggests that countries rich in natural resources are often plagued by corruption and instability, doesn't always tell the full story. While South Africa has a high GDP, it also has one of the highest levels of inequality in the world, with a Gini coefficient of 63 in 2023. The legacy of apartheid, during which mining profits were funneled to white-owned firms, has contributed to this inequality. For example, Anglo-American extracted over $100 billion in gold between 1970 and 1990, which helped to fund the apartheid regime. Debt-for-nature swaps and IMF programs have also faced criticism, with some accusing them of perpetuating neo-colonialism. Zambia's 2023 debt restructure with China, involving $6.3 billion, has been criticized for its opacity and the inclusion of hidden debt in commodity swaps. The implementation of AfCFTA has also faced delays and challenges. Nigeria initially hesitated to join the agreement, and 15% of rules of origin disputes remain unresolved, potentially favoring multinational corporations over local businesses. It's also important to acknowledge the data gaps that exist in our understanding of African economies. Crisis datasets often exclude post-2014 events, such as the Tigray War in Ethiopia, which resulted in an estimated GDP loss of $28 billion. The informal sector, which accounts for a significant portion of Africa's GDP, is also often underrepresented in economic data. So, what does the future hold for African economies? The UNCTAD 2024 Resilience Framework emphasizes the need to address vulnerabilities and build resilience to future shocks. Despite the challenges, there are also reasons for optimism. Ethiopia's GDP grew by 7.1% in 2023, driven in part by infrastructure projects such as the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Fintech funding for SMEs is also on the rise, with Nigerian companies like Flutterwave attracting significant investment. And South Africa is making progress in transitioning to renewable energy sources, adding 6 gigawatts of solar and wind capacity between 2020 and 2024. Ultimately, Africa's economic story is complex and multifaceted. It's a story of historical legacies, modern challenges, and ongoing efforts to build a more prosperous and resilient future. By visualizing the data and exploring the hidden truths, we can gain a deeper understanding of this dynamic and evolving continent.